Hello, fellow foodies, and welcome back. This is Dr. Cassandra Quave, and you're listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the science podcast for the food curious. This week on the show, we're going to turn back to one of my favorite topics, and that is fermentation. And I've got a fabulous episode planned for you. We have as guests today Kirsten Shockey and Christopher Shockey. They are authors of the best-selling Fermented Vegetables book to be re-released in April 18th of this year of 2024 as a completely revised 10th anniversary edition. They've also written the award-winning The Big Book of Cider Making and the award-winning book Miso Tempeh Natto and Other Tasty Ferments. And if you recall from an earlier episode I had with Kristen, we talked a lot about some of those amazing recipes in her bean ferment books. Kristen is also the author of the award-winning Homebrewed Vinegar. The Shockeys got their start fermenting foods over 24 years ago on 40 acres of wooded hillside, which grew into their organic food company. Kristen realized that her passion lay in the desire to both teach people how to ferment and to push this culinary art to new flavors. She offers experiential workshops worldwide and online, offering people help in how to make, enjoy, and connect with their food through the art of fermentation. She's a mom and grandmom and a co-founder of the Fermentation School, which is a women-owned and women-led benefits corporation supporting the voices of independent educators to empower learning and build culture. She can also be found at her Substack, which is called Fermenting Change. Thank you both so much for coming on the show. It's great to see you again.
Thanks so much for inviting us. Yeah, delighted to be here.
Ah, so I'd love to learn a bit more about the re-release. You're now 10 years out with this fabulous book on fermenting. I have it at home. I love it so much. Just, before we jumped on the show, I told you I was starting to ferment some more of our chili peppers. We love making homemade hot sauce and other fun kind of pickled vegetables. Tell us what's the impetus behind the re-release and kind of what new goodies might we find in this new edition?
I think that the world has changed so much when it comes
Mhm.
to fermentation in the last 10 years. Honestly, more than anything. I mean, we have, as the two of us, we've learned so much more, but I mean, the science has just gone, you know, bonkers on gut health. And like, there was hardly anything out there when we wrote this first book. Everybody was still like, ooh, we're more microbe than human, really? And now everybody's like, yeah, that's old news. Like, what's going on? And so that was huge to want to update the science
Yeah.
and
Recipes?
recipes. Yeah. And techniques. When we wrote this book, it just seemed like everybody wanted to make a pickle or sauerkraut, but it was still very much based on those very simple type of ferments. And I mean, the book is still super simple. We didn't want to lose that. Like, come on in, come in the kitchen, let's get something going on your counter. But we also acknowledge that there's just that fermentation. It's like there's all these little dials and it's limitless. And we wanted to give people more tools to use it for flavor and preservation, and of course, health and fun.
Yeah, fun. Well, that's the thing I love about your book and the recipes because, it is easy for folks to jump in with kind of a beginner's level, even if you don't know anything at all about how to ferment things and get started. And then, like you said, there's a dial you can tune up to really get into more, perhaps a little bit more complicated ferments and really create some incredible flavors. What are some of your most popular recipes that you feature in the book?
Boy, old ones, right? I mean,
Mhm.
the
Lemon dill.
lemon dill. Yeah. So we were at market for years. Well, not for years, a couple years.
Felt like years.
And yeah, lemon dill was one of the most popular there. Curtido, which is an El Salvadorian riff on sauerkraut with, full onions and oregano and cumin and garlic. And so those flavors, people just keep coming back to, ourselves included. I mean, they're simple, but they're delicious. And I think those are, besides kimchi, I mean, so many people love kimchi, but besides kimchi, a lot of people are a little like sauerkraut because in their mind that's that can or that jar that comes from the
Yeah.
grocery store. And it does not, it's not even in the same league. And so lemon dill really is just lemon, dill, and garlic with the cabbage, but it brightens up the flavor and just is so much more fun for the palate. And I think that's what brings people in. It's like, oh, it doesn't have to taste like that stuff that my
Yeah.
mom made me eat.
Yeah. It is funny, like your childhood memories of certain foods for, not a fermented product, but my mom would always serve canned asparagus, which was just still the most disgusting thing I think that's available in the grocery store because it's stringy and gooey. And I was like, I hate asparagus. But then I learned like, oh, they're quite delightful if you prepare them, grilled or whatever. I was like, oh, I love asparagus. So I think it's interesting what you're saying too. Is like the way that we prepare things, the things that you may access in the store are not going to necessarily have the same incredible flavor profile that you can create at home with these techniques. Yeah.
Totally. Asparagus is amazing fermented.
Mhm.
Mm.
You can stick those fresh stems in a brine and let it ferment, and then it stays crispy and just makes wonderful, pretty little pickles.
Mhm.
Great. That's awesome. So going back to the back, I know that you mentioned the microbiome and we've learned more about the importance of microbes in the diet and in our gut health. Can you share with us a bit about like what are some of the new elements that you've brought into the storytelling in the book around the microbiome?
I think we tried to update just the current science around brain and the vagus nerve down to the GI tract, and really helping people understand those cravings a little bit.
Mhm.
Because anecdotally, for me, I lost my sweet tooth, which I had cultivated over my whole life, eating
Yeah.
all these fruits, and so I think I experienced that change in my microbiome, and then I had less cravings for one thing and more cravings for something else. And when we work with people who get the book, they'll share similar stories about that. And so they then become curious. Well, how did that happen? Why am I doing that? Why am I not wanting a donut? And so
Yeah.
it's a nice way to start transitioning into how our body works, really.
Yeah, it
I
is interesting. Yeah, when you think about the gut brain axis and I guess it's a mind shift, right? Going from, as you said, Kristen, of the idea that we're more microbe than human to now understanding that what we eat really is not just feeding our bodies, it's we're cultivating a group of microbes in our body that then influence our mood and our food cravings, which is, a bit of microbial mind control, a bit strange to think about, but that's, what the science is showing now.
Mhm.
well, and I mean, I think it's just super fascinating. Like I mean, if you can get there in your mind, like it's sort of a relief to know it's not you that doesn't have the self control to say
Mhm.
stay away from jelly donut. It's your microbes that are like "Send down the jelly donut." And if you can work at changing those microbes, you're going to be relieved of that. But I think the other kind of fascinating thing is when we wrote the first book, like so much of if people had heard of fermented vegetables, let's start there. I mean, 10 years ago, you'd be surprised how many people hadn't, right? But if they had, they were like, oh yeah, I think I'm supposed to be getting probiotics and like it has to be live. And so in the first book, we talk a lot about try to eat it raw or barely warmed up, keep the probiotics alive, and so on and so forth. And it's funny because that always bugged me back then. But now, because it bugged me because traditionally, like, in Europe, they stew sauerkraut for hours and
Yeah.
kimchi is made into soup and added to soup. Miso is used in cooking and, it's not boiled, but it's hot. And so, that part of my brain was like, but all these cultures have always cooked these foods. So why are we saying we have to eat them raw? And now the science is telling us, oh, it's the metabolites that they create when they're doing their job in the vegetable. It's their little dead bodies. They also are good for us. So if you really want, your fermented vegetables warm, go for it. And I feel like kind of taking that pressure off of how to eat them into no, they're just an ingredient. There's something you can cook with. They're something you can eat raw if you want to or not. It's just, incorporate them in any way that makes you happy because they're still going to be good for you. And that to me was a huge piece.
Amazing. I really like your point about metabolites, and just to like bring the audience up to speed what we mean by metabolites. Within plants, we have secondary metabolites, these molecules that bring health benefit to our bodies. What we found is that bacteria in the gut create their own metabolites based on what we're feeding them, but they can also create these metabolites when they're, eating, processing the sugars and ingredients from the plant ingredient itself, like in the fermenting jar, creating all of these different molecules. So these are just transformation of molecules that can then have health benefit when we consume them. I think that's exciting. It's like medicine in a jar, right? Yeah.
So much happening in that jar.
Yeah. So I mean, Chris and Christopher, you've got so many great lessons in this book. And I'm wondering if maybe you could share maybe some simple recipes for folks that have never gotten their hands into a ferment. Like, what would you say is probably the easiest kind of way to start with trying to ferment something? What type of what type of product would you recommend? Would you think like a pickle, like, or stick some cucumbers in a jar? Like, what does it all entail? Yeah.
Yeah.
I still think sauerkraut.
Yeah.
I still think sauerkraut. It's just red salt submerge. you know, you're cutting it up so that you're breaking the cell walls, releasing that juice. You add the salt, which helps release more. And, squish, squish, squish in the jar. And then the microbes are doing the work. Like Christopher said, carrot sticks are super simple, but, it gets just already l- little more complicated when you have to like stir a brine and think about stirring a brine, like with the sauerkraut, like you're literally just chopping, squish, 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 press, press, press.
And you're done. Yeah, you don't have to measure so much about. You just kind of toss some salt in it and massage the cabbage up. And hey, nice.
And you bring up a good point there. So with fermentation, there are fermenting techniques. I mean, vegetables is just one of so many. Most food that we love, it has fermentation somewhere in its process. But like charcuterie, like it's really specific. You better get your salt right.
Oh,
Whereas with vegetables, the parameters that are of success are huge. The salt is there in order to pick teams. Like it helps get some of the microbes that might be on that vegetable sort of out of play because they don't like the saline environment, and it encourages the lactobacillus who we want to encourage. But it's like 0.09% is the least amount. And I mean, you can go up to 10, 12, 15%. I mean, quantities you'd never want to eat.
yeah.
So my sweet spot, I feel like in my temperate climate is, around that 1.5% because salt does a lot of things. It hardens the cell walls. It keeps that crunch. It controls the fermentation. If the weather's too hot, for example, you want it a little higher. But if you're really, truly just getting started, you don't need to even worry about those percentages because your mouth will tell you, you put a little bit of salt in there and taste it. It should taste salty, not briny, but like
Nice.
pleasantly salty. Like, oh, that makes this cabbage taste yummy. And I can taste it. I know it's there like a chip, but it's like it's over salted as soon as you go, oh, that's salty.
Much. Yeah.
On behalf of the pickle, if I may,
Yes.
I still would have called because if you have little kids and you're trying to get them, that first foot in the door,
Mhm.
you know, I think that just julienning up some pickle or some carrots and having the kids do it and then putting it in the jar and just that magic of, describing it as a salty bath and they're going to and then they start to see bubbles. And then the transformation, because the carrots have some residual sugar, so they're a little bit sweet, but then they get that sour crunch. And I think when you start hook that sour crunch, sweet crunch, that's what gets kids. And then
And adults.
adults.
Let's be honest. Kids like ferments more than adults.
But it's a great technique. Once you know how to pickle something in a brine, then you look at all your vegetables and say, you're all going for a bath because I want to put you in a jar and see what you'll do. And I think when the kids get excited about that, they get to Kirsten's point, they dragged the parents along with them. But in our farm, when we would have at the farmer's market, we'd have maybe 10 or 12 different samples. And the kids just come up and start eating it. And the parents will, intercede and say, "Oh, you're not going to like that. That's sauerkraut." As they're just
Ah.
full on going down. Locusts. And then they look like, "Oh, okay." So for us as educators, part of it was trying to break that cycle of you're not going to eat it because I didn't eat it. I grew up in the Midwest and I didn't even know what asparagus was. We'd never seen it. I'd never seen it. My parents didn't eat it. They didn't eat, well, they thought most vegetables were weeds. And so he didn't eat weeds. And so therefore the kids didn't eat weeds. And so when I met Kirsten, I ate three vegetables. And
Wow.
so be careful who you
And one of
meet.
those is a potato, like
Still, the other was sweet corn, but it still counted. The other was iceberg lettuce.
Where is your
That's
vegetable?
strong vegetable.
potato and corn both headed towards starch. Well,
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well,
you
it's
can't,
great that we think like kids aren't going to eat their vegetables, but it's, there's this perception well, I could go off on a tangent about this, about why we should get rid of this idea of kids meals in restaurants start with, because they're usually highly processed foods that are really bad for kids. Like, let's feed them ferments. Let's get some vegetables in them. I think that sourness is, why we like Sour Patch Kids, right? There's this desire for that, in childhood, have that sour tartness to our foods.
yeah, sure. And they just love the whole concept of microbes eating sugar and farting CO2. I mean, if you want to get kids involved, tell them that's a job. If you're a microbe, that's what you do. And they just light up like, that's what I want to do. That's great. So that gets them curious. And then they just want to see what it tastes like and it goes from there.
I don't know if you've ever thought about doing a children's book on this, but I think that would be amazing if you guys ever did explore that, because yeah, I think it would be great to like show kids more of this, how easy it is to make these. One other thing I want to talk about is you've mentioned your farm and you've got 40 acres where you've grown vegetables and fruit trees for many years. Talk a little bit about, the importance of the starting materials, right? Like, how important is it when you're creating a ferment to have a good quality starting ingredient?
sure. That's another place where I've kind of changed my mind because of fermenting, in all sorts of places with all sorts of accessibility to food or not accessibility to food. And so, yeah, when we wrote the first book, we were deep into our own garden and we live in an area where there's a lot of organic farms and, so it seemed to make the most sense that obviously, and it still is true, the better quality of anything you put into something, you know, the the better quality the final product will be. And so of course, you know, fermenting something straight out of the garden at the peak of its freshness, at the peak of everything, what that hasn't been grown with chemicals is going to give you an amazing, amazing food. Because what we haven't talked about, of course, is how the nutritional density increases. But then you think about that and then you realize that even if, you're looking at those carrots that are limp in your crisper drawer, the one,
Yes.
and you're thinking, "Oh, I shouldn't throw those out." Well, instead of being food waste, now those carrots can be leveled up. And actually, the fact that they're partially wilted and dehydrated just means they're going to have more flavor in the ferment. And you're going to capture the nutrition that's in them. You're going to capture the food before throwing it out. And the same goes for, if you have vegetables that are conventionally grown and, maybe the cabbage has been sitting in cold storage forever. I mean, we've been in places where we've, gotten really sad cabbages and we have to do a demo and they still ferment, and they're not organic and they haven't been treated with respect and love. And to me, that was such a huge eye opener. It's like anybody with access to any vegetable can take that vegetable and level up that nutrition because, more vitamin C is on board. It brings up the vitamin C content vitamin B, a little bit of K. Um, we also now have digestive enzymes involved. Everything's been broken down by the fermentation, and so it's all more bioavailable. And so there's just, between food waste and accessibility and cost considerations, and just thinking too that these foods came about because people needed to preserve nutrition. And
Yeah.
so that's what they do best is they take a moment in time, which is harvest, and they preserve it. We didn't have refrigeration until very recently, and they
Yeah.
fantastic job.
I think it's fascinating. I think it's hard for folks to wrap their heads around this idea of only having food during seasons of growing your vegetables or seasons of wild collecting. I've been lucky in that doing my field work in different places. For example, in Eastern Europe, I've worked in communities in the Shari Mountains where they don't have access to a grocery store, period, during the winter months. They're kind of, locked off from the rest of the world, and whatever they grow or wild harvest during the warm months is what they eat in the winter, and they eat a lot of fermented products. It's just incredible, all the things that they ferment, and they're delicious. Like, I've been there in May, which is the end of their winter season. It's warm, the roads are clear. Still a bit, can be a bit cold, but you don't have snow on the ground any longer. And I've tasted some of these yogurts with chili peppers embedded in them and just fermented tomatoes and lots of cabbage products. And they taste incredible. Like, they store incredibly well and are really good for them. I mean, they consider them to be health foods in their culture. So
They're right.
absolutely, absolutely. It's one of my favorite things that they make are these wild fruit ferments that are just kind of like, collected like rose hips or dogwood fruits that they ferment, and kind of they call it like a lemonade, but there's no lemons. It's just they make it in these recycled, old soda bottles and have these fermented sparkling sodas that are just incredibly rich in vitamin C and other, flavonoids that are great antioxidants from these. And so it's incredible how you see this across so many cultures, how folks have figured out how to use the crops of their area. And that's another thing I love about your book, because you have such a beautiful nod to the origins of different cultures and their culinary traditions, and bring that out in your writing. So I really appreciate that, because I've learned about new types of foods that I'd never had the chance to try in different countries through your books. Yeah.
Great.
Nice.
And so I guess, well, that leads me to another question. Like, where do you draw inspiration for your recipes? So, when you're thinking about trying new things at home and then eventually deciding which things go into the books, like, where do you draw your inspiration? What's that process look like?
It's messy. We should also say we have a house that has more kitchens than bedrooms. So we have really 3 bedroom or 2 bedrooms, but 3 kitchens in our house. And
Wow.
so when a book's being written, Kirsten's a whirlwind of trying things out in different places and, trying to get them right over and over again. And so she's the inspiration of putting things together. And I'm just the plodding tortoise behind her that tests the recipes because I cook. I still get out our own cookbooks to make things. And the
Awesome.
grandkids just think that is so funny. But I follow recipes. And so Kirsten would come up with something and then I'd make it. And if it's not like what she made, then we knew that there was some magic that we hadn't
Mm,
captured until
nice.
until it tastes the same. So I think we're ideal, but I would never be able to come up with things on my own. Innovation for me is I change one thing on the recipe and I feel it pretty edgy. Whereas for Kirsten, it was hard just getting her to write things down. So that was the skill she.
It took well, this is book technically number 6. I think it took me at least 4 books to decide that I should do a better job writing things down. We got this little notebook thing where you can write it with your hand and then it transfers it to because otherwise it was all envelopes. It
Yeah.
transfers it. I can send that to my computer and it will decipher my handwriting good enough.
Magic.
As far as the inspiration, I have to say I I don't know. It just obviously sometimes it's something I've tasted, but we also, like you said, live out here in the middle of nowhere. And, I'm not going to run to the store and get an ingredient just because that sounds
Mhm.
good. I'm going to say, what's close? I want a lemon. Well, sorrel leaves might give me some notes or something because, yeah, well, one is I'm very interested in trying to eat as seasonally as possible, but also I am I hate, you know, going to the store and getting in the car and driving 45 minutes. And so a lot of things also come from what's abundant around me right now and what am I going to do with that? And then sometimes it's just like lately I've been obsessed with adding ferments to ferments, but in the form of like preserved lemon. Like I've been obsessed with
Oh, yeah.
and when I first started preserving lemons, like I just like use them here and there a little bit. And then all of a sudden I use them everywhere. So I don't know what changed in me. Must be the microbes.
Feed us more preserved lemon. That's great. So I know that you grow also a lot of fruit trees on your property. We've talked a lot about vegetable ferments and kind of lacto fermented products. Do you also make any kind of sparkling ferments or like alcoholic ferments or anything like that?
The third book was the cider book. Our fourth book was the cider book. And so I trained as a cider maker and we thought that's what the farm was going to be as a cidery. And then when I went away to train, I learned that you had to be a really good mechanic because everything breaks down, the bottling and everything breaks down. And I can look at a pipe and it starts to leak. But I thought this is probably not good. And in the meantime, we had this certified kitchen. So we started vegetable side waiting for the fruit side to come in and then all the apple trees to come in. And so, had it not been for that, we would have just been cider and never written a vegetable book. But because I'm so unhandy with mechanics, we ended up going vegetable side. But we did do a cider book. It was a lot of fun. We did about 120 different varieties. Trying to,
Wow.
yeah. So we had a cider cave that was just wall to wall bottles. It was a wonderful, and it was during COVID, so it was a real dangerous time to be writing an alcohol book. But we did. But that was the second book tour that was during the pandemic. And so that was the one we were just going to drink across the country and it was going to be great
He's still feeling a little sad about that.
because I mean, sometimes we would have like steaming crock pot of soybeans walking through the hallway of the hotel,
Mm.
and the room smelled like kimchi or some, we just felt so bad for the next people in there because we were making those ferments for the books.
Yeah.
And this one, we were just going to taste local ciders all across the country, and another microbe stole it. But your point earlier about the soda bottles, and I think those really quick little fizzy drinks are a lot of
Mhm.
fun. Great way. People get kind of wrapped up about, well, I don't know. I would never be able to make wine because it's a fancy thing. When really it is, it's just, yeah, it's just fruit, and they already come with all the yeast on them. So,
Yeah.
they want to become that, and you're just capturing it in a space and preserving it for a little bit. But we
Yeah. But it's a lot of fun to take the fruit and I mean, it like Christopher said, you just capturing it. And that's the problem with wine, right? Because it's like you've got your fruit starts out as sugar and without intervention, very soon it heads to fizzy. I mean, we've even
Yeah.
all of us know that feeling of biting into a fruit and thinking, wow, that's funky. And now we know it's just yeast working on it. It's on its way. And so capturing it really early as a juice with a little fizz is fun because some of that sugar's been converted and broken down and you get the bubbles, but you're not really getting alcohol. And so, yeah, the other thing that we started doing this year though is when we first moved here, I overplanted prune plums, sort of yeah, as one does, right?
I mean, I have 2 plums in my yard. I would like to have many more, but yeah.
But the thing with prune plums is like all these like fizzy drinks or, we've tried for
Yeah.
years for prune or plum wine and different things. always taste pruny, which I like fruit juice, but like I don't like pruny wine.
Yeah.
And we figured out, I don't know why it took this long, because in my head, I've always thought, umeboshi, you have to have the umeboshi plums you know, and so now we're making prunaboshis and
They're good.
they are so delicious. Like it
It's
was like,
like a plum wine? What is pardon my
well, so
ignorance, I don't know what Niboshi is. Is that like a
it's the Japanese pickled plums, are really salty ones.
Oh, okay.
It's not a drink. That's probably why you're like, is it a wine? Because I just skipped
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're super salty and they ferment for a long time and, get through the alcohol phase and all of that and yeah, make this delicious little and then you add shiso leaves to it and it makes it a beautiful color and sort of gives it this
Oh.
other flavor and so those are super fun and so we finally figured out something to do with these dark plums.
Yes. There's so many plums. Everyone gets plums for their birthday or
We eat so many prunes, but there's a lot of trees. It's hundreds of pounds.
oh boy. Yeah. That's great. One of my favorite fruit are figs. I'm wondering, have you ever come across any good fig recipes in a similar way, like fermented figs? I don't know. I know how to make jellies and things or jams from them, but this is for my own selfish reason. I'm going to have a lot of figs soon. So,
We have 2 fig trees that we finally found a place on the south part of the farmhouse where
Mhm.
they freeze so badly. But problem we have now is grandkids who they're like birds. They'll eat
Eat
them
them
when
up.
they're like, yeah. And until the fig tree gets tall enough to get out of their reach, I don't think we had any ripe figs to try on the cider side.
I made fig vinegar and
Yeah,
it's delicious.
Oh,
that would be the best.
nice.
And actually, even if you don't have figs, but you have a fig tree, which is a problem that we sometimes have, fig leaves are amazing for flavoring ferments. You can
Mm.
you can put those in, those fizzy drinks. You can put them in, the bottom of a crock and you get these nice, almost tropical flavors added to the ferment, which is really lovely.
One of my friends taught me a fig leaf liqueur recipe, which I still love to make. I've been known to before we got our own kind of trees established. I've been known to, take a few leaves here and there for the neighbors' trees. But it's such a simple recipe. You basically make a simple syrup with like sugar and water with this fig leaf, and you let it boil and then sit overnight, and then you kind of squeeze out all the yummy flavors from the leaf and the syrup, and then just mix it in with a bunch of gin. I mean, it's not very complicated. It's a very gin forward rest, but delicious. I mean, the sweetness and with the fig, it gives this incredible flavor. So I can imagine that the leaves must be really good in different ferments as well. I've never tried it in a ferment before. You know,
Yeah, play around with that. Yeah,
yeah.
these are your neighbor's trees, doesn't
Yes.
matter.
Great.
And flowers, I mean, you can do so much with flowers too. So the
Mhm.
the new book, I couldn't help myself. I, added some flowers. One of which, of course, is the artichoke, which is a huge flower, right?
Yes.
But dandelion buds. I mean, the edible marigolds. I mean, there's just so much flavor and such in flowers. So, uh,
Incredible. That's great. Well, I love all that you share through your writing, not only with your amazing books and this beautiful new 10th anniversary edition of Fermented Vegetables, but also your writing on Substack and you have these incredible courses online as well. Can you share with us a little bit more about where folks can go? I would imagine that many of our listeners might like to try some of these recipes or lessons so they can get started in this as well. So where can they go to find that information?
sure. So the fermentation school is fermentationschool.com. And it's a project that came out of the pandemic when my friend Meredith Lee and I found ourselves traveling fermentation educators that were housebound. And we realized that, you know, it's a very noisy world out there. And so it just kind of evolved as we thought, well, let's put ourselves together for people to find her classes and my classes. And then we realized, well, there's a lot of, you know, women that are out there trying to share knowledge and that have wonderful, wonderful knowledge to share. And so now I think we have 13 or 14 active creators on there and, all kinds of courses. I've got vegetables and vinegar, tempeh and hot sauce, and flowers, and I don't know, challenge and whatnot. But then Meredith has full courses on charcuterie, and we have, a woman who does a lot with oats. And I'm trying to think, sort of going blank.
Non-dairy cheese or
Non-dairy cheese. Yeah, there's just, a lot of wonderful, wonderful things on there. And so, yeah, just fermentationschool.com and start exploring. We also have a membership program now with webinars and whatnot. And I think we created a code for that for
We
your
did. I was going to plug that the code. So for anyone that wants to check out the fermentation school exclusively here for our foodie listeners, you can enter the code ferment with us all together, ferment with us. And that will give you 35% off of courses at the fermentation school, which is super generous. Thank you for sharing that with our listeners.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, our goal is to support women creators and get
Mhm.
people fermenting because it just is such a wonderful, wonderful thing for people to step into. And then, yeah, I guess I haven't held up
We
the
have
book.
Yes, and we're gonna have a book giveaway too. So foodies, make sure that you tune in to our social media channels. We're gonna have a book giveaway of some copies of Ferment with Us, Fermented Vegetables, 10th anniversary edition. That's really exciting. Thanks.
Yeah. And then Substack is, like you said before, it's fermenting change. That's Substack. And yeah, I write about fermentation and life, not necessarily in that order. So the Substack ideas has kind of evolved over time, but a lot of it is also, just the things that are going on around here at our home, because that's also very much part of what's going on.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Kirsten and Christopher, for coming on the show. It's really fun to chat with you and learn more about all these awesome activities that you have going on and great recipes. And congratulations again on the 10th anniversary edition of the book.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for all the work you do.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. You've been listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the science podcast for the food curious. Remember to head over to our site at foodiepharmacology.com to catch this episode and all of our others. And be sure to visit our social accounts. We're going to have a fun book giveaway. We'll also have information about that great discount code on the fermentation school programs that you can sign up for if you're interested. Thanks so much for listening. I just want to give a big thanks to our producers, to Rob Cohen and Christine Roth, for putting on a great show for you each and every week. Stay healthy out there. Keep fermenting, and I'll see you next time.